Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a full tank review for you of the brand new Tier 10 American heavy tank. It is the M5Y for a new series of tanks that look to be some absolute hold down monsters with a brand new reserve track mechanic, which means that they can keep rolling even if their first track gets taken off. This vehicle feels like it's going to be very, very, very meta, aka great hold down with limited weak points, with enough hull armor to still dissuade from those easy pens, especially from lower tier vehicles, and with a voracious rate of fire. I'm going to be painting the full picture of this tank for you today and let you know whether it makes vehicles like the T110E5 and the Super Conqueror irrelevant. So unfortunately, as Wargaming didn't release a common test server for the heavy tanks, the statistics haven't been uploaded to the Awesome Tanks GG website, so I'm going to have to use Wargaming's inferior in-game comparison. I'm going to compare the M5Y to the T110E5 and the Super Conqueror. Those are the most near this tank with regards to tech tree vehicles. I must mention, however, the M5Y has two gun configurations. One that we can see on the left with a 105mm and one that we can see on the right with a 120mm. Now, when you first research this tank, you won't have the 120mm right from the get-go. You're going to have to grind 52,000 experience if you want to have the privilege, or maybe not, of having this gun. Now, in my opinion, I think that this vehicle is specialized at DPM and ridgeline presence. I don't think it's a trading tank. And I don't think the 120mm is nearly as good as the 105. And I'll tell you why. Firstly, the only thing that you get is alpha damage. For 80 extra alpha damage, you have to sacrifice penetration on your standard rounds, penetration on your premium rounds. You have to sacrifice about 10% of the damage per minute of the tank. You have to sacrifice accuracy, and you have to sacrifice aim time. Unfortunately, I don't have the hidden statistics, aka the dispersion values between these two guns, and so I'm only going to have to guess. But I can tell you the 105mm through my play session definitely doesn't feel like it's got horrific dispersion values, even if I don't use vertical stabilizers. Accordingly, I would thoroughly recommend that you consider keeping the 105mm gun on this tank and not using the 120. And as I said in my video yesterday, I want to highlight how you can tell what gun an M4Y is using. You see this kind of dustbin lid, the flare, the muzzle brake at the end. That means they're using the 105mm with lower alpha damage but better DPM and a better rate of fire. Alternatively, if they're using the 120mm gun, you'll see that it's actually substantially longer, almost comically longer from the side, but it no longer has that flare on the end. And so use that to your advantage in the upcoming weeks, as I expect there's going to be lots of these things in the matchmaker, to know which kind of M5Y that you are fighting. So if you see that it has the dustbin lid, probably try and trade 1 for 1, but be careful because it's going to try and fire 2 shots for every time that you fire at it, unless you're playing a medium tank. And if it doesn't have that flare at the end of the barrel, it's got the 440 alpha, and you should probably try and shoot it multiple times for every time it shoots you, unless you've got a higher caliber gun. Accordingly, this is going to make this tank comparison fairly complicated because it either has better alpha damage or worse alpha damage than the T110E5 and the Super Conqueror. It either has better accuracy or worse accuracy, better aim time or worse aim time. And so to make this simpler, I'm only going to compare the M5Y in what I believe to be its its preferred configuration, which is using the 105mm. So immediately we see that the M5Y has APCR as standard with 10mm extra penetration over the T110E5. Its shell velocity is also lovely at over 1,400, whereas the E5 and the Super Conqueror have to fire APCR rounds in the latter, or heat rounds in the T110E5, which obviously don't have as good shell velocity. This makes the M5Y feel really nice for sniping in shots, and it kind of makes it feel like it's more of a medium tank than a heavy tank. All of these vehicles have identical gun turret traverse speed, which is not half bad, and it definitely doesn't feel as if it's a super heavy tank at 33.38 with a 100% commander. The gun depression on the M5Y is lovely. It's got 10 degrees of gun depression. This will give you all the flexibility you need on a ridgeline to dominate your opponents, a lot like on a Super Conqueror. This gives it a 2-degree advantage over the T110E5, which is wonderful, and it also has a slight elevation advantage compared to the E5 and the Super Conqueror of 3 degrees. All of these vehicles have 1.92 seconds of effective aim time, and their accuracy is, well, the accuracy of the M5Y is identical to the T110E5 at 0.34, but worse than the Super Conqueror, so don't expect this to be sniping like that. Now, if we look at the DPM of all of these tanks, the E5 and the Super Conqueror have a DPM advantage compared to the M5Y. Now, if you use the 105mm, it's not that much worse than the E5, but it's still significant. If you use the 120mm, your DPM will be substantially lower than the other two vehicles. Hit points wise, the Super Conqueror has the advantage, with the M5Y identical to the T110E5 in this regard. Now let's move on to the survivability of this vehicle with regards to its armor. The M5Y has 178mm of frontal hull armor, whereas the T110E5 has way better frontal hull armor at 254, but the Super Conqueror at 152 is definitely not good unless you're using your gun depression on that tank. Although the Super Conqueror does have that layer of space protection on the top, which is not half bad. Side armor wise, the M5Y in my play session was pretty darn good. I felt comfortable side scraping. It has an angled side armor, which as we can see here is boat shaped, but not by too much. It's not like a T110E5, whereas if I zoom in on this hull, I feel like it's much better angled. As we can see, it bows all the way out. This means that you don't want to over-angle your M5Y like you can your T110E5, so be careful if you're expecting to be able to do that. The M5Y is kind of this midpoint between a Super Conqueror, which has a horrible hull, and a T110E5, which has a lovely hull. But really where the M5Y is wonderful is the turret armor. 356 on the front of the turret, way better than the T110E5 and even better than the Super Conqueror. Although it does have a weak point on top. As I'm going to be showing you later in the gameplay, players are able to hit the top of your tank, but only when you're not using your gun depression. As soon as you are, this thing becomes the absolute god tier tank, and you will have your opponents at your whim on our ridge line. And because you don't even have like any lower turret armor as well, it doesn't give any turret ring issues unless you're really exposing where the turret is mounted to the hull. An absolute bizarre design on this tank, but it works out really well. And I would say the M5Y has a much better turret than the T110E5, especially against gold rounds, and certainly feels like the superior vehicle from that regard. There's one thing that I want to highlight about the M5Y, and that is that it only weighs 40 tons. And so definitely ram this thing in a wide variety of tanks, and don't think that the M5Y is going to be a very good ramming tank from that regard. Accordingly, for a relatively light heavy tank with an impressive power to weight ratio of over 18.75, this thing is very mobile indeed. And its top speed limit of 40 forwards and 15 backwards is superior in every way compared to the T110E5 and the Super Conqueror. That makes this thing feel more like faster heavy rather than the traditional mid or slower heavy, even if you want to call it that in 2022, of the T110E5 and the Super Conqueror. And I feel that with the good gun handling on this tank and probably slapping a turbo on it, it does elevate the vehicle to feel more like a slower medium or definitely a faster heavy. All in all, when I look at the statistics of the M5Y, it just looks like a better T110E5. I really don't think that this vehicle should have had the rate of fire that it does. It's more mobile, it's got better turret armor, and to round it all off, it has 400 meters view range, which means that you won't even need to use coated optics on this tank. You're just going to be able to use vents. I think the Wargaming have released this tank statistically strong, unlike the Rinoceronte, and I believe this thing is going to be a great performer inside the game. This is the first tank, I guess, since the VZ55, which is also a very good performer, that really looks like something to fear on the battlefield. And why don't I show you why in the gameplay? But just a second, because I've got to make some recommendations. Firstly, for equipment, I would recommend to have two setups on this tank, one with vents, gun rammer, and turbo, and then one with the survivability module, vents, and a turbo. Use that for the maps which you get on, like Ensk, that are smaller, and you will be laughing at your opponents as they fail to be able to take your tracks off reliably with the reserve mechanic, and then they'll wince as you repair them quickly, and then just keep rolling. It's crazy to think that this vehicle has comparable, if not better, statistics than a T110E5 and a Super Conqueror, considering that it also has an entire extra mechanic that keeps it more mobile than those two vehicles as well. Field mods wise, this is a versatile heavy tank, so I would recommend you take all-terrain suspension, you increase the accuracy of the vehicle, you take the view range of the tank. I would recommend that you improve the reverse speed because your gun traverse speed is good enough on a tank like this. And then I personally am going to go for reinforced hull on this tank to reduce the HE damage that I take to protect my crew from injuries. And really, taking the dispersion hit doesn't feel like so big of a deal. But If you find that the gun handling is a little bit weak without it, then maybe just don't take that field mod. I wouldn't really recommend going the other way, otherwise you could make yourself very vulnerable to artillery, or even just having the annoyance of your crew getting knocked out. I would personally take the mobility slot on the M5Y if you have bounty equipment on this tank, because it's very unlikely you're going to have a Bond turbo lying around. But if you aren't going to use a turbo, obviously don't take the mobility slot on this tank, and I'd probably recommend going for the firepower instead if you don't have a Bond or a bounty rammer to put on this tank. But you know what? I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Why don't we get stuck into some gameplay? Let's get this show on the road indeed. Firstly, we're going to be rolling out on the Pearl River map, and I'm going to be going with a gun rammer, vent, and a turbo, because I believe this is a map where you need some speed. You quite often will end up driving about 1 kilometer on this map, even in a heavy tank. Of course, if you have the speed to be able to do so. And I feel like that's going to allow us to get to the ridgeline first, to hopefully try and pressure that position. Obviously on this map, it's all about playing for your hold down scenario, and if you're able to dominate the high ground here, which I easily will be able to do with my 10 degrees of gun depression, that'll be wonderful. And having the turbo will allow me to get there first to be able to dictate the pace of the combat. And that's exactly what I want to do. Now, I'm going to be using the 105mm on this tank, so I've got the extra DPM, I've got the extra shell velocity on my stand rounds, and I really do love this 105mm gun. It kind of feels a bit like the gun that's on the STB-1 with that regard. And talking about an STB-1, here is one. I'm going to fire on the move against them. And considering I've got a bunch of tanks behind me, I'm not gonna back down from this situation. And I really feel like this is the kind of tank that shouldn't back down. And look, we're already using our reserve track mechanic. The STB-1 tried to shoot our side, and we're going forwards, we're going backwards, we're continuing to fight our opponents, and we didn't even bother have to use our repair kit. That allows us to get multiple rounds out against the AE Phase 1. The reserve track keeping us in it. I'm going to put a round down there on the M5Y on the enemy team, and I'm going to load a gold round because it didn't look like I was guaranteed to pen the APCR round against the M5Y's upper hull. M5Y doesn't look like all M5Ys are equal in this scenario. They overexposed their turret. Doesn't look like they took a turbo on the tank. They were too slow to be able to get into position. I'm going to take the inside track here to be able to get the E75. Artillery is going to fire at us, and because I'm on my press account, I have all of the bells and whistles on this account, so I've got sound detection, usually a useless skill. And just take a look at the speed of this thing. With a turbo, it's just crazy. It's more like a medium than a heavy tank. I really, really enjoyed all of my games with the M5Y. It was just the all-purpose heavy tank. Bizarre, because it doesn't look like an all-purpose heavy tank, right? Looks like an absolute freak in World of Tanks. And make sure you let me know in the comments where you think this thing, does it look like it's meant to be part of the game, or do you think that it just looks a bit too weird? A bit bizarre that this thing is going to end up meeting a Tiger II, right? Albeit in a nice matchup. Alright, so artillery has stunned us, which is rather irritating. But we're going to continue to apply some pressure. And we actually managed to ram the Batchat for 128, which is some significant damage still to be able to add on top. We are 2.5 minutes into this game. We've already racked up a couple of kills and 3,000 damage. The enemy look like they are in rout right now. And I'm going to try and pursue that advantage to see if we can manage to put some rounds into the back of the T110E5. One heavy tank going after another. Although, you know, different with regards to the T57 Heavy having an autoloader. So in this kind of a situation, the alpha damage gun, the 120, would have been better. I still rolled for 400, but that is a high roll. I have 360 alpha on a gun like this, and my rate of fire, while it's good, it wasn't quite good enough to be able to reload, to be able to go after the T57 Heavy. Unfortunately, in this situation, I probably should have ignored the T57 Heavy and gone for the Object 268 version 4 instead. But luckily for me, my team seems to be sucking out as they're fighting him. We fire on the move against the Batchat, and we're reloading and nearly ready to go for the Object 268 version 4. We're going to come around the corner, going to try and track this player to lock his tracks in place. I don't quite manage to hit the track, but I've got the mobility to be able to get behind him. I think I actually just managed to track him with a tiny little collision there into my tracks, and I didn't even take any damage. And now we're just putting round after round after round to the side of the vehicle, and this is where American heavies do well. But unlike the T110E5, we're just that little bit faster to be able to get there. And we've got those reserve tracks from earlier to stop us from being locked in place against the STB-1. And that's a scary prospect, right? Hello, Chaff, you cheer for. You having a good game? Well, I guess you're not having a good game anymore, scallywag, as we ram a tank to death. And in 4 minutes, we have picked up 4 kills and 5,000 damage. I think this pretty much just shows what the M5Y is all about. But I haven't shown you really what this tank is like on a ridgeline, apart from at the start of this game. So I'm thinking, does this slope look safe? Ah, yes, it's probably safe, right? It's probably safe. Yes, very safe slope. It doesn't look like that slope was safe. So until my roll of stupidity, that game was going pretty good. 5,000 damage for 4 kills, 1,111 gives us our first class medal. What did we really see here about the M4Y? We saw that it's fast. We saw that it can definitely push the tempo and get the damage out. We also saw that in a situation we're able to overpower an STB1, even played by a very good player. Of course, I did have a 279E behind me, but just that kind of pressure you can put up with the turret armor on a ridge line while still having good DPM, albeit not the best alpha damage, doesn't seem to matter when you can put in multiple shots. Alright, so now we're rolling out on Malinovka, and we are using, once again, the same setup. Gun rammer, vents, and a turbo. It's something that I think is going to work really well for this vehicle, for me and my playstyle, but of course you should go for whatever you think will work for yourself. Now, I'm going to use the mobility that we get from the turbo with the excellent power to weight ratio of this tank to just plow up the slope. And look, there's a chieftain on the enemy team, the vehicle that everybody is talking about with regards to clan wars and is going to sweat to be able to get over. Is it started the next few weeks, next month? I don't really know. I'm not too into the whole clan wars scene. But one thing I am going to show is this chieftain, what the M5Y is all about. And that is that I've managed to get up on the hill just as fast, if not faster, even though the artillery did manage to hit me. The chieftain misses, and I'm going to use that as my signal to be able to start to put some pressure up on them. We're going to put a shot into their lower plate, but they also turn their tracks at the wrong time and get tracked. And you know what, mate? You got DPM, I got DPM, let's do this. He uses a med kit to heal his stun. I've locked him in place, I'm harassing them. I'm going to shoot the T-57 Heavy instead. Probably should have shot high explosive anti-tank there. And this chieftain is starting to back off now. We put a heat round into the cheeks of the T-57 Heavy, and here I can show you that this vehicle is actually pretty darn good at side scraping. It's not a slouch. It's probably not quite as good as the T-110E5 from that regard, but this turret and just the way that the hull is so thin just seems to be able to work out well. A lot of tanks, the hull is way wider than the turret, but this one, that's not the case. And the whole design of the turret just makes it feel as if it's decent for those kind of situations. Okay, so I should be okay here against all of these vehicles. I'm looking for an APCR round against the Leopard, but I'll fire it at the T-57 Heavy. The APCR rounds, as I've mentioned, on this tank with its great shell velocity just feel absolutely awesome. And they're even able to go through the IS-4 there because they're 268mm of standard pen, which is nice. Although the shell drop-off will be worse, and remember they don't normalize nearly as much as AP, so against angled surfaces they won't be as good. So I just lost 2 crew members with a single shot. And let me clarify, I am using the field mod that actually makes it so I take less crew damage, so to say, or they're more protected from damage. And I'm also using a large repair kit. So it looks like, because your hull is so small and all of your crew are kind of cramped up together, that you should definitely try and protect your crew. And that's why I would recommend taking the reduction from stunning, the reduction from crew damage, and the reduction from just HE damage for the final field mod on this tank. Okay, so we've managed to deal with the high ground. Looks like the enemy artillery are firing damaging shells. They do 442 and I don't take a stun. And I'm just going to get into position, and this IS-4 looks a little bit confused against us. And I wouldn't blame him, because this is a brand new tank. He's probably thinking like, where do I shoot this thing? What is this freak of a turret? Now I've got them multiplying in front of me. What am I going to do? I mean, it's an IS-4. It's sad. We've all been there, right? We've all been this IS-4, and I'm sure a lot of people will be this IS-4, unfortunately, especially against a tank like this. So I'm going to put a round at the top of the ST2's turret, and this accuracy and gun handling just feels great. And in 4 minutes, we dealt 4,500 damage. Now that the hill fight is over, we've blocked 2,000. Hopefully this gives you an idea of just how darn decent the M5Y will be with regards to its hull performance. Upper hull, not perfect, but decent. Take your chances and you'll ricochet, especially if you're using your gun depression. And the top of the turret, very, obviously a little bit tricky with regards to the weak point on top, but not too bad. But the frontal turret is just wonderful, purely because of the size of the turret. It's an absolute monster tank with that regards. But unfortunately, even a monster tank like this, when we get on Malinovka, it's just going to be really a montage of snipes and hoping that my team are going to be able to spot for me now, boys and girls. So I let my EBR know that I will support them, and can they light up the forest, we'll all fire for you. Unfortunately, the EBR believes they're going to die, which is a fair shout, actually. And so the EBR is instead going to try and push out some view range from down there. I get spotted in that location, which leads me to believe that there's going to be a Batchatillon 25T in here, and so I decide to fire at them twice, and this is pretty much just Malinovka gameplay. I should pause here for a second and show you that I got shot, I believe, in the front of the hull there, or maybe even in the turret. Unfortunately, I won't be able to tell, but we still took a substantial amount of damage. 545 from the FP405 and 162 from the artillery. That's not a large amount of damage to take from an artillery, though, although he is using the stunning shells, not the damaging shells. So we're going to put a round into the FV, a round into the M5Y, try and fire the M5Y one more time blind, and I'm going to ask the Object 268 version 4 now to spot for us. I mean, I would be the one who would charge in if I had the hit points. It'd be really fun to use the reserve track to just keep on rolling through the forest in that kind of a situation. My team is just chilling. The UDES is actually going in, which is wonderful, and I let the Object 268 version 4 know that I'm going to help him out, and I decide to do so by pushing into the forest. And are we going to be able to get some shots off here? Possibly, maybe. Object 268 version 4, we track them, we're going to retrack them, and this is where this alpha damage is just wonderful for retracking your opponents. And just like that, we managed to get 1,000 tracking off against the Object 268 version 4 that we saw. Maybe we did a little bit more. Unfortunately, heavy tanks, not the best of camo once you're firing, and the Object 268 version 4 is going to be able to reload and shut us down. My team are going to be able to finish this off, and we managed to stack up an impressive combined total here on Malinovka. Now, I want to highlight exactly what was just so awesome about this game and why I feel like this vehicle is going to be so great. For this kind of a plow up the slope, and it's not an unusual plow up the slope. Quite often you'll get these kind of situations on like a mines. You have the power to weight ratio to be able to get to those positions first, but as long as you're not going downhill, you know? For maybe trying to race into position on a map such as Airfield or El Halouf, an IS-7 might be faster because it gets a little bit of momentum up. But for these kind of maps where you need a little bit of power to weight ratio to go up a slope, this thing feels like an absolute performer. I would thoroughly recommend to get a turbo on this thing, to get to those positions first, to control them, and then once you're there, man, I didn't have to play many games to have good games with this tank, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to unlocking it on my main account and clocking up a few battles. So in that round, we got to see us make a pressure play against a chieftain early. We had the power to weight ratio to get into position to be able to take out the 54% win rate player playing the chieftain, lock down their tracks, obviously with a little bit of artillery pressure there, and we're able to go on and get 8,700 combined. Although, because I wasn't spotting for my own damage, we don't get much experience. Just another example of this, we're going to be playing on the cliff map, and I've managed to get into position, not quite as fast as the T-62A, although I was blocked in being able to get up here, but we've managed to get up faster than all of the other heavy tanks because of the great power to weight ratio of the vehicle. And here we go, M4Y versus Kranvang. Well, I managed to use my gun handling to get a clutch shot off. This Kranvang seems to be very confused as to where he's meant to shoot a tank that just has such a tall turret and doesn't have to expose its hull. K91 unfortunately keeps me honest at the back of the map, and right now it's just about kind of relaxing, not trying to jump in too much, but also to try and apply pressure to this Kranvang to force them to have to keep their turret towards me, which should hopefully allow my team to be able to plow back. So we're gonna fire at the VZ55 there, the previous tier 10, well, the previous latest tier 10, and look at this gun handling, look at this gun depression, look at this turret armor, look at this ridgeline domination, as if we need more ridgeline monsters going into the game. I know that I'm probably going to be quite happy about this tank inside this tank review because, spoilers, this is my kind of tank. This is what I will play. This is the kind of tank that I will love to be able to play inside World of Tanks. Unfortunately, there's an M5Y who is using the 120mm caliber gun sniping at us. Take a look at this here as well. I mean, let's actually just go and fly and take a look to see what exactly our opponents are being able to see now. Over these rocks, they're literally they're seeing just this turret and a bit of upper hull as we are putting round after round into them. Now I also want to, this is an important part of this video as well, because I want to highlight my testing of the M5Y. So I fired some AP rounds, they haven't worked. Now I'm trying to fire heat rounds at the upper hull. Are they going to work? Not reliably, not at this kind of distance with this kind of accuracy that we have. So instead we're going to go for the weak point on top of the turret and bingo. But obviously that M5Y is aiming at the people below me, and so if you're able to get above one of those things, it's nice. Heat round there to the upper hull was able to go through, and keep in mind that the M5Y doesn't have the best of heat pen. It's only got 315. It's not nearly as good as many of the heavy tanks and medium tanks. They've got 340, and in that kind of a situation, they're going to probably be able to go through this tank a lot easier. Every time I managed to get the tank into a position like this, it just felt like I was the dominant vehicle. It felt like it was my playground in this situation. Unfortunately, the enemy are just sitting in such bizarre locations. There's a leopard who's camping their base along with an M5Y. I've got enough hit points to be able to take the occasional shot, and considering the only tanks that have managed to pen me so far are the ones that have caught me from awkward angles, it's really going to be that kind of a situation for a tank like this. When you know what's in front of you and you control the situation with your armor, oh my word, it's lovely. Although, you know, it does have a big side profile. I'm going to reverse up this slope, and this is where this tank would just be so amazing. Imagine if they shot me in the tracks there. I could drive up that slope with my repair kit on cooldown, something that I would never do in my wildest dreams in a T110E5 or even in a medium tank. But on this vehicle, because of the reserve track, it's highly unlikely they're going to take both of our tracks off, and so we can take more risks. We can push over that ridge line. If they track us, they're not going to stop us from being able to continue to get into a safe location. Or we can try and push up into advantageous situations to be able to deliver the final shot into the Super Conqueror. That's really where this tank is just so awesome, and why I feel like this one is maybe a little bit too good. I feel like it might be a little bit too good, boys and girls. For my initial play in the M5Y, and I'd like to clarify that it's not extensive yet. Wargaming have definitely lowered the quality of my opinion in this video by not enabling us to have a lot of time with the tank on the test server. Luckily, I do have a press account, which has enabled me to be able to get this tank fairly early. But oh my word. This one it's a powerhouse. One thing I would like to mention is that it looks like the gun is completely locked to the turret. So this means that even if the tank is using the gun depression, that its weak point will still be available. So it's not like there isn't going to be an opportunity. Accordingly, do you know what you should probably do when you play this tank? You should probably actually raise the gun slightly, I'd say, in between your shots, if you can on a ridgeline, to be able to hide that weak point just a little bit more. The M5Y, definitely a meta tank, definitely one that you're going to have to consider making your way up. And considering that all of the previous tanks in the line are not too bad, I don't think it's going to be so much of a pain to be able to get towards. I expect this thing will be destroying the matchmaker over the upcoming weeks, because it's got the mobility to be able to get into position, it's got the turret armor to be able to punish you while it's there, and with an impressive damage per minute output that you can clock up, yeah. This one is definitely a vehicle for me. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was my tank review of the M5Y. Really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know what you think about the M5Y in the comments down below. Do you think it looks great? Do you think it looks awful? How do you think it stacks up to the T110E5? Are you going to grind to be able to get one? Or do you think it doesn't look like the tank for you? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.